Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in.
Is there anything more powerful in the world than a mother's love? I'm inclined to think not. And this really, ultimately, at the heart of it is going to be a story of a mother's love. And I think one of the most difficult things for a parent to experience is to watch a child struggle with something the child didn't choose. And so this is a beautiful story of a mother's unwavering love with a son who went through very, very significant struggles to ultimately achieve probably the pinnacle of human education and just really grow into a remarkable human being. Welcome to the show today, Lois.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely. And so I'm excited to explore this story because I'm early on in my own personal parenthood journey. I have a toddler and I have a number 2 on the way. And so it's, for me, I enjoy getting to hear the wisdom that comes from years of being a parent and now, I guess, the joys of being a grandparent as well.
Yes, I mean, when these little things come into the world and they look so just adorable and delightful, you can't see the journey that they're ahead of them, or you can't even see many of the struggles. Interestingly, when Nicholas was very small, months old, and I was changing his nappy or his diaper, what I recognized then was he wouldn't ever roll. It didn't matter what I did. I could leave the room and I know that my Nicholas would still be on that table. And I didn't identify that was a problem, number one. And just recently, they've said he has a genetic problem with hearing and balance.
Interesting. You know, I think it's fascinating because so I have a toddler. At the time of recording, he's just over the age of 2. And I think now we're starting to observe as he starts to emerge and develop more and more independence, we're starting to observe behavior patterns. And the one thing so I'm 41. I'm an older dad. Most people start out in their 20s or maybe their 30s, but rarely do you start out in your late 30s and early 40s. But hey, that's the path of life.
True.
Right. The advantage to this, though, is now I have years of accumulated life experience. I also work in the field of, behavioral psychology, and compassion is kind of the core of the work that I do. And so what that means is that I now view my son differently and his development differently than I might have 10 years ago. When I might have just become frustrated with his behavior because I didn't understand. I like to say that all behavior makes sense. And there's a wonderful podcast that I've listened to a few episodes from. I think it's called Unruffled. As I'm saying here, a wonderful podcast whose name escapes me, but I believe it's called Unruffled. And the idea behind it is that there really isn't bad kids, but behavior makes sense. It doesn't mean that all behavior is ideal, but behavior makes sense. And if we can start to understand what is the driver behind that behavior, we can be much more compassionate and patient as we observe the struggling, growing, developing human brain. And so I think you got to witness something really quite unique. Starting from there, you had this observation, but maybe the dots weren't yet getting connected.
The dots were not connected. And the second component of that is Nicholas had ear infections from the ages of 8 to 18 months. Okay. And that loss of hearing, and it's not only while the child's in the grip of the ear infection, but before and after, they are not receiving language adequately. That's one. And the other part is that part of the brain that works well, and Nicholas's spatial awareness works incredibly well, was still growing. So now we've got the combination of poor language missing at a critical time of brain development, because it's the brain that's impacted, followed by a part of the brain that's zooming ahead. Even there, we've got discrepancies between the lowest and the highest of what's growing.
Right. And that's like when we bring the child to the doctor to sort of for some routine checkups, and we say, hey, we observe this thing here, we see this thing here. Generally speaking, if it doesn't appear to be life-threatening, oftentimes it might get overlooked as like, oh, you know what, this might just be some delayed development here or there, but it's not really a big deal. He'll catch up at some point in time. And it really, it's like we have to be our child's best advocate. And we live now in the age of the internet and information, and there is the opportunity to maybe advocate a little bit better as we're better informed. We can ask better questions. But maybe perhaps, I'm not sure how old your son is currently, but we go back 3 or 4 decades and we think there wasn't really that same understanding or opportunity or access to information that allowed us to ask more informed questions. And very often doctors didn't like being questioned because it was seen as maybe their authority being questioned. So I'm curious if that was kind of your experience.
Yes. But, even then, it was the last decade of the 20th century that Nicholas went to school. And I thought we understood human development and language development and learning a lot better than what we did. But in the end, we're teaching a class. He doesn't fit normal. We really don't want him here, but, we have to have him. And what was worse was that the teacher shouted at him every single day. And it still breaks my heart that not one person from that school, the teacher or the administrators, ever called me in and said, your child's in trouble. Teachers are shouting at him. He's staring into space. He's learning nothing. No one did anything. It was like they accepted, this kid is dumb. He can't do anything. Well, it doesn't matter how we treat him. What a thought.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to hear, because I think of how much I love my son, and I understand that, like, it's not that the entire world is going to love him or see him. Like, I see him as just the most beautiful little human being, like, and maybe I adore him more than most parents. I don't know. There's something about a parental love that it's not that he can do no wrong, but I'm so kind of enamored with him and watching him develop and whatnot. So then the thought from that perspective of somebody rejecting my young child who didn't ask for a particular struggle, didn't put up his hand and say, hey, I would really like to struggle all through my developmental years. And then an adult who doesn't understand, and we would expect from teachers and educators that they would understand the diversity of sort of child neurological development and realize that a child that might act out or misbehave is not necessarily trying to make your life miserable. They're experiencing a really strong emotion around maybe a frustration or a feeling of rejection or a feeling of being different or not fitting in. And that emotion needs to be given place and expression. But maybe there wasn't, it sounds like from what you described, there wasn't really this sort of level of compassion or patient understanding in this situation.
Nicholas never acted out.
Really? Yeah.
Nicholas totally withdrew.
He
just stared into space and just wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. And he never had the words to say, I can't do it. I'm trying really hard, but I can't do it. And that he couldn't understand the teacher. So you've got this gorgeous little kid who just gives up. He just gave up. And one day I sent him to school, and I drove him to school, and I had a 2-year-old, and so he's 5.5. And he said to me, Mummy, can you take me into school? And my 2-year-old was heavy and not walking properly. And I said, oh, Nathaniel, my eldest, can you take Nicholas in? And it breaks my heart that I didn't take my son there because something obviously really bad had happened the day before, and he felt further humiliated and wondered if he could actually walk into the classroom and sit there. That's how bad it was. And he couldn't say to me, this is what's happening in the classroom. Our children have so few words. They can't even describe what's happening to you. And I wasn't allowed to see what was there because I had this 2-year-old. I couldn't take him. My parents were 40 minutes away. That's, all of this complications. It's really, really, really tough. Right. And I'll tell you something at the end.
Okay.
Tell you at the end.
Again, I think I'm really grateful that we're recording or doing this interview at the time when I'm just early in my parenthood journey, because I feel so deeply how much I love my child and how it's almost mind-boggling, and I think only a parent can really understand this, how much we want the absolute best for our children. Really, it's I love him more than I love myself, and I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know what that would feel like, but now that I'm a parent, I can't explain it. And so again, the thought of this, a sweet child just withdrawing, and so much happens in the early developmental years where there really isn't the linguistic ability to express what's happening. And so I think back again to the difference of me as at 40 being a parent versus me at 30, to understand that, for example, when my son is misbehaving, maybe he's climbing on something he shouldn't climb on, for example, he's trying to do something that he knows will get my attention. He's trying to bring something to my attention.
Yeah.
And so I think about, your sweet little boy here trying to, in his own little way, bring something to your attention and say like something is not right. And so you yourself, as you're witnessing your child kind of experience this, you mentioned, maybe the sense of guilt at that time, like not being able to go in and help him when you kind of look back in hindsight, in those kind of moments in time. And so you're a mother of 3 at this point in time, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Your life is busy. You're trying to navigate multiple parenthood, and that in itself is a challenge. When you kind of reflect back on that time, do you feel as though you can have a sense of compassion for younger Lois, who is just trying to make sense of, parenthood as it was at that time?
A sense of compassion. I feel I failed.
Mm-hmm.
I wished I had supported particularly the eldest sons far more effectively. My eldest son was the rabble-rouser. He learned at the speed of light.
Yeah.
And you've got my Nicholas learning at the pace of a snail. So you've got these extremes. And because the eldest one did learn at the speed of light, I didn't understand why he wasn't doing well in school.
Yeah.
Just get on with it. Do it. And it's
Right.
very interesting now, And then you've got this Nicholas who just looks like, way out of the world. He doesn't even belong in school.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that's what the teacher said to me. I don't know how I'm going to teach him. Day 6 of school. How am I going to teach him? I wish he wasn't in my class.
Right. And I think about, so this is an interesting, maybe we could say an indictment of the education system or the public education system as a whole, where a teacher goes in and they're handed maybe 30 students or 25 students, and you have to teach all of these kids, and you're essentially a glorified babysitter at that point. My brother's a teacher. And, because could you imagine, let's say that, for example, being a parent of 25 children? My goodness, how would you keep them all in line, right? So in a sense, I share that to express a degree of compassion for the position of the teacher and recognize, okay, but that being said, there's a missing piece here. Yeah. There's something that should have been here. There just some kind of, instead of just saying, I wash my hands of this, I don't want this kid, I don't, why didn't the adult in the room say, we need some help here?
It still blows my mind why someone didn't say that. If they knew that early on, why didn't someone come to me and say, let's look at alternatives?
Right.
And now this is an interesting dilemma, deviating from the story. If I had removed my son from school, if I had the opportunity to remove it, and I failed and sent him back to school the following year, the school would have said to me, well, you should have left him with us. We would have done a better job, wouldn't we?
Right. And actually, just for listeners who might not know, because they might be hearing the Australian accent, but where was it that your son was going to school?
We were living at the time in Brisbane, Australia, which is our home. And the younger 2 boys were born in Brisbane. And my husband is a university professor, so he was teaching at the local university, which was the biggest university in the state, and one of what they called the Big 8. Big 8 universities in Australia. So it was a top-notch university. He got his PhD from Oxford. And, 20 plus years later, Nicholas gets his PhD from Oxford.
And that's a gap that we want to kind of bridge here through the telling of the story, because that's really remarkable when we think about going from here to there. And so at this time, were you a stay-at-home mom, just caring for your kids? I don't want to say just a stay-at-home mom, because I think it's the most noble of professions, but were you working as well?
You're right. I was a stay-at-home mum, and actually that becomes critical in the story, Because when you've got a child who is as far behind, as far out of the normal as Nicholas, I don't know what you do. I don't know how you do it. If you're working all day and then come home to this child who is struggling, you don't, I would not have had the emotional energy to deal with Nicholas. So that's, a real complication for today's generation.
Absolutely.
Really, really, really difficult struggle that we have. And we don't value the mother, we don't value the child.
Yeah,
enough.
that's a very interesting, because motherhood, in a sense, is unpaid work. And,
Yes.
I'm still so my wife is on maternity leave. So I feel very fortunate and in Canada, we get quite generous maternity leave. My wife can take up to 18 months. And with our first one, we took the full 18 months.
Yes.
It was so needed. And then she also had the benefit of, because of COVID, like her work transitioned to remotely. My wife teaches English to refugees to Canada, which is really quite remarkable. She was able to work in the evenings when I was not working, and she was able to work from home. So it meant that one of us could always be available for my little boy. And I get the benefit of working from home as well. And so I recognize we're in a really fortunate situation where we get to have that. But I agree. For somebody who would be going and working all day and just feeling drained at the end of the day, and then coming home and wondering, like, what do I do with this child? I don't even know what to do, and I don't hear anybody offering suggestions to help. It would feel like a very difficult and kind of helpless situation. And so if we kind of move along the timeline a little bit, so by the time Nicholas is really in kindergarten, the earliest of school, it's already recognized that he's learning at the pace of a snail, as you said, that development is extremely slow, and his educational outlook doesn't look very good. As he moved into, say, like the first grade or year one or year two and so on, how did that situation progress? I say progress, maybe it was regress, but...
No. This is where the story changes.
Okay.
My husband, I said, is a professor. So in 1994, he failed. Testing revealed he could read 10 words. He had no strengths and he had a low IQ. Good. We're in a really condemning basket, or a condemned basket. In 1995, my husband has study leave back in Oxford. And the family go with him, and he's going for 6 months. I go prepared. I take a series of books to help Nicholas learn to read called Success for All. And I send the eldest one to school. I send the youngest one to kindergarten. So I've got Nicholas by myself. And we start using these books. Isolated words on the page. Decode 3 letters, come up with the word, and read through each isolated word. End of the page, we go back to the first word, and Nicholas has got no clue what's going on. So I started to get frustrated. He's not getting it.
Right.
My mother-in-law was with me, and she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun. What can you do? What can I do? Nicholas can rhyme words, and he can see patterns. I know what I can do. I can write some poems, because I'll give me rhyming words and it'll give a little story around the rhyming words. I wrote the first poem. The transformation in our classroom was astounding. Instead of having a child who's frustrated, he's smiling, and we're repeating it, and we're loving it, and he's learning it. My mother-in-law did the illustrations. Because I had one success, I continued success after success every day until you come to the double O's. And I wrote double O's as in Cook, Look and Book. And I wrote a poem about Captain James Cook, the last of the great explorers. And it was, Captain Cook had a notion there's a gap in the map in the great big ocean. He took a look without the help of any book, hoping to find a quiet little nook. So you've got this really tiny poem with these huge ideas. Christopher, go away. Chris, my husband's just come into the kitchen and making a noise. Excuse me, I hope you can block this out.
Well, we'll edit this one out.
Thank you. And so you've got these huge ideas. And while we're doing this, we're also seeing books and maps in the city of Oxford and around the university, everywhere. And Nicholas says to me, first question he asks is, can I see Captain Cook's original maps? As I thought about this, that question does not come from a child with a low IQ.
Right.
That was the
Absolutely.
first question. And then he says to me, who came before Captain Cook? And I said, oh, that's easy, Nicholas. That was Christopher Columbus. And he said, and who came before Columbus? I'm blown away because I have never thought of who came before Columbus. And we're in the city of Oxford. And the guy who came before Columbus was Ptolemy. And Ptolemy drew the first map of the world in 230 or 250 AD without leaving Alexandria in Egypt. He took the information of sailors and drew. And so we go to the city of Oxford, we go to the Bodleian Library and say, where would we find a Ptolemy map? The lady leans around from behind the counter, picks up a book, plops it on the table and says, this is a book of Ptolemy maps. That'll be £5, please. And
Wow.
that's the start of the story. Now, the teaching has gone from teaching of decoding to learning. And Nicholas has got a reason to learn. And then one lady gave me a series of books called Hear It, See It, Say It, Do It that helped me teach him to decode. So we're attacking learning from multiple phases. And but the poetry came first and the decoding came second. And it was the poetry that was the driver of Nicholas's learning.
That's fascinating. You know, when you mentioned Captain James Cook, so I have also New Zealand or Kiwi heritage. My grandfather's from Gisborne, and Gisborne is the first city in the world that sees the sun according to how we sort of delineate our maps and our lines of topography.
Yes.
And in Gisborne, there's a statue of Captain James Cook.
Yes.
And although I've been to New Zealand twice, I have yet to go to the city of Gisborne. And I always wanted to go there as a child because I saw a picture of the statue of Captain James Cook, this great explorer. And so I wanted to go and see this faraway land that he discovered. You know, I think about how we take for granted, like having sat nav or satellite navigation, having GPS, having Google Maps or Bing Maps or Apple Maps, you know, or we just punch a destination in and the whole world has essentially been mapped out. And it's almost like, I think it's hard for us to even conceptualize, I'm going to sail on a wooden ship that doesn't have an engine, that has giant sails, going in a direction that I don't even know where we're going to get to, and sailing into the great unknown, but I think I'll probably hit land at some point. And then I'm going to draw a picture of what I saw as best as I can. Like, this is incredible stuff. And so I think it's really wonderful that Nicholas got very, very curious about this.
Oh, exactly. Well, I'll continue the story because we go back to Australia, and I saw the diagnostician who had done the testing the prior year. And I said to Nicholas has just asked these amazing questions. She stood in front of me, put her hands on her hips and said, well, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching.
The worst child she's ever seen in 20 years of teaching.
Yeah.
That's a very limited frame of mind. And I actually feel kind of sorry for this individual. That's what she thought. But because I know now that we've come to understand that there's at least 8 different types of intelligences. And when we think about a standard IQ test, it doesn't really, or maybe now it's changed, but I think about when I last took an IQ test, I scored maybe 168 or something along those lines. But I have a brain that works really well for that sort of standard type of learning, in particular because I have a very good memory and I have a kind of an engineering brain where I can assemble things really quickly. It turns out I actually have ADHD. I found that out at the age of 41. So for the first 40 years of my life, I had no idea why my brain worked differently than other people's. But it turns out it's almost like having a superpower that I was the annoying kid in class because I had all the answers just one after another like this without ever having to study. And the kid, oh boy, but I had no idea that other people's brains didn't work like this.
Yes.
I didn't know any differently. And so I share that because I think about St. Nicholas, for example, has this really unique brain, this unique type of intelligence. And it was a matter of like unlocking, how do I access that intelligence, help him to navigate the world the way that he sees the world, you know, because so often what we assume is somebody who is dumb is actually someone who could be very intelligent, but sees the world in a different way.
Right. 100% agree. And that's why that time away was so important, that I was given the freedom to do anything. Because if we'd stayed in school, we would have been stuck with decoding. He couldn't do it. He couldn't remember it. And the complication that you've got an IQ test that says he's dumb.
Right.
When the child fails, it's because he's dumb. It's not because I, the teacher, failed. And
Right.
to be able to do anything with Nicholas and tap into it. And I don't know where to tell this other story, but
Let's just throw it in there.
okay, 2018, Nicholas gets his degree with his PhD. He's confident. He's articulate. He's lived around the world to get there. That's all right. And I said to him, Nicholas, I don't know what happened in first grade. I really didn't know what was going on. And no one told. Can you tell me? My son cried and not a word escaped from his mouth. And that's when I recognized that the trauma that happened when he was 6 years old was still there. It was still in his brain, still unattended, and no one had helped him get through that. And
So
I
trauma,
thought, well, I can't.
yeah, the trauma gets recorded in the timeless part of the brain. And I'm so grateful that now we have a level of understanding around trauma that time doesn't make it go away. There was this idea for so long, just you'll get over it. And what's wrong with you? Why can't you just get over this? I've been through trauma and PTSD myself, and I didn't understand it until I started searching for answers for my own struggles. And I came to understand that, oh, trauma doesn't just disappear with time. I actually have to get professional help to work through this.
And our children are so young. You're talking about your 2-year-old and your baby. 6 years old is I don't know why we are so hard and demand so much of little children who are just trying to survive and just trying to learn like everybody else. Anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, children are beautiful. And that's not to say that children are perfect little angels. I mean, they come with a human nature. They come with their own desires and so on and so forth. But really, very few children come into this world with, say, sociopathic or pathological tendencies. It's a very small percentage. And so most kids, what we call troublemaker behavior, is actually a cry for help. I don't get it. Something doesn't work. Something bad has happened to me in some way. I need help.
Yeah.
And, I think about how our education system was set up and kind of standardized for a certain type of intelligence. And we failed to, and what's really interesting is I think of a number of people who've been highly successful in the world we would look up to and admire. And it turns out many of them didn't complete a university degree because their brain didn't fit into the standard mold. And that was seen as a detriment, when in turn, actually the ability to see the world through a different lens meant that they could be extremely innovative and creative in their approach to the world. And this is not to knock university education, but to say,
no,
I believe what's kind of been happening this last decade or two is really we are undergoing this evolution of our understanding of education. There we go. Evolution of our understanding of education. Where
I like that.
where we're recognizing that we have to, if we want to actually, because education, I think, was made to make little factory workers, essentially.
Yes.
That's
and we only wanted normal. We only wanted normal. And we'd find something else for the others.
Yeah. And so I think so you've unlocked the code, if you will, to Nicholas's brain. Now, how does Nicholas as a child interact with his brothers maybe after this starts to happen and this has been unlocked? What sort of relationship does he have with his brothers?
Interesting. He's quiet and more difficult. The eldest one, flings out information all the time and talks all the time. And Nicholas, you have to think and give him time. But he was always the peacemaker in our family.
Yeah.
Between the youngest and between everyone. And what's interesting with Nicholas is that, the brain spins around at 100 miles an hour in the head, or faster. It spins fast. But to get from the thoughts that happen in any way through to language is a funnel. And it's a really tough funnel, which is why when he asked, can I see Captain Cook's original maps? That's not just something that popped into his head. There was a lot of thinking going on before he had those words come out. And the same is true today. Okay, the challenge for today, Nicholas is on this extreme. He fits on the 99th percentile of spatial awareness on a test. He sits on the second percentile for language and phonemic awareness and struggle with those sorts of things. So, and when you interview someone, what are you seeing? Not the strength, the weakness. And the work that he does to do an interview and to apply for jobs is phenomenal.
Right. Absolutely. So as he progresses through education, he moves through maybe the elementary years, grade, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of thing. Does he go back to a standard public school, or is he educated in it? Yeah. And do you enter into it now much more informed so you can advocate for him to say, here's how you might be able to work more successfully with him and not be frustrated by him?
I'm never frustrated by my Nicholas. I learned this is the way he learns. I was frustrated by the school system because after we got the diagnosis of the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching, something extraordinary happened. That afternoon, the reading teacher sent Nicholas home with 2 sentences to learn the word saw. S-A-W. The sentence was, I saw a cat climb up a tree. And the second sentence was, I saw a man rob a bank. Nicholas stood in front of me and he read, I saw a cat, and he stopped. And he went back and he said, I was a cat. And he shook his head, no, no. And then he said, I had a cat and I assed a cat. And then he just handed me the paper. It took me a while to work out what was going on. This is what put the fire in my belly. The word saw has 3 meanings. I saw a cat, Nicholas stopped, because he's cutting the cat in half. Because he's got the concrete meaning.
Right.
Both sentences only provide the abstract meaning of the word saw. They fail to teach him what you have to do as a reader to work out what to do with that sentence. The failure lies in how we teach.
Interesting.
Then I became a reading specialist, and I read this paper that I have right here in front of me called Beyond the Deficit Theory, written by an Australian professor. And what did it say? Children fail to learn to read because we give incomplete demonstrations of how the written language works. What happened to my son? Incomplete demonstrations of how the language works, and how quickly we flip around to he hasn't learned it because he's stupid.
Right.
That's what put the fire in my belly. And whenever a problem came home, I, as a stay-at-home mum, would take 24 hours to think, how am I going to teach this word to my child? I became very aware that concrete words that you can touch and see, are easy. Words like would, could, and could, or of and are much more difficult for our children to learn. Okay, they've got a problem. How are we going to teach them? I would spend the day working on something so Nicholas would have it in the afternoon. And instead of it being, just learn this, kid, how much fun can we make it? And it transformed the way I teach. And that's what drove me to become a reading specialist.
Right, absolutely. And so, and I guess what I was thinking earlier is, were you able to advocate for Nicholas to the educators, to the teachers that he was going to have, that, hey, he listens differently. We now have this better understanding of how he learns. Does that mean, were they able to sort of incorporate that into their educational practice? Or did he get an educational assistant, or how did he navigate his way through the elementary going to high school system?
That was another extraordinary story. That's why I wrote Reversed. He had the worst teacher in grade 1. He had phenomenal teachers in grade 2, and the teacher in grade 2 adapted the learning to meet his needs. Like the first time he was in grade 2 with her, she gave him spelling words of rhyming words with cat, hat, rat, bat, and so on. He and I could do that at home. And so we went to school by the front. He could spell every one of those words. And so the teachers were really good after that. The teacher he remembers most was his 3rd grade teacher, who he just fell in love with because she read books to them. And she accommodated Nicholas. So that was, and in grade 4, the teacher said, he's such a curious kid.
Mm.
Okay, the extraordinary thing. If we'd stayed in Australia, Nicholas would have been in the bottom of the class. Still curious, but slow with everything.
Mm-hmm.
In 1999, our family moved to Lubbock, Texas. Now, if you know anything about the United States, Lubbock, Texas is in the middle of West Texas, hours from anywhere. And he repeated for a second time in Lubbock. He repeated grade 4.
Mm-hmm.
With that, the gap between his learning and the classroom learning has shrunk.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to take in more in the classroom. He learned to read, he learned to write, he stayed in the classroom. Nicholas always worked so hard. And in fact, I identified 9 factors that happened in Lubbock that would not have happened in Brisbane, Australia.
Mm.
In Lubbock, Texas, he went from the bottom of the class to the top 20% of the high school class in physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, you name it, he did it.
Mm. Remarkable.
And it's not a normal story. But
Right.
that change and the things that happened in Lubbock enhanced and provided the growth that he needed to go from the bottom to the top.
Right.
It blows me away even today.
And so as he graduates high school, instead of being the worst kid ever, he did he know that he was going to go to Oxford? I mean, I've been Oxford, for anyone who's not visited it. It's this gorgeous university, this white sandstone buildings, this beautiful campus. I mean, did he, as he was beginning to learn and advance, and his intelligence is beginning to shine through, and he's performing better in school, what sort of led him to know this is what I want to pursue as higher education?
I think that really came during his undergraduate degrees. And now this is where our family is extraordinary. Nicholas went back to Tasmania. My husband took a job back in Tasmania, and he did his undergraduate degrees in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
He started off in engineering, and engineering and mathematics are closely tied. And because Tasmania is small, the engineering and mathematics students flip backwards and forwards to do their studies. And Nicholas just kept doing more and more mathematics, more and more.
Mm.
And I think it was while he was there that he fell in love with the mathematics professor. There were half a dozen students, doing honours mathematics. It's a little hothouse. They're feeding off each other. The professor is renowned for inspiring people. And it was while he was there, I went to Nicholas's dorm room, and he had on the wall, master's degree, PhD. He had on the wall beside him, master's degree, PhD. And then as a scholarship came up for Oxford, he applied for it and he got it.
Mm.
And Oxford,
Amazing.
I'm putting my finger number 1, because Oxford is the number 1 university in the world.
Mm. Wow.
Or was, or competes with Cambridge and Harvard and MIT.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very prestigious institution.
Yeah.
And so he ultimately goes and acquires or achieves, I should say, a PhD in applied mathematics, which is remarkable. And so here we have a 6-year-old who's thought to be as dumb as a post and unable to learn, now achieving a PhD in one of the most difficult disciplines, applied mathematics, and at one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Quite a remarkable arc. And I think a lot of credit goes to you for your persistence. And, it's natural for us to want to look back and go, I wish I could have done this. I should have done that. And we live in this world of should have, could have, would have. And we need to, and I speak to my clients a lot about this, finding this place of acceptance. I did the best I could with what I had at the time. And so I make peace with that. And now we move forward, because we really don't, so acceptance is not about quitting or giving up or things like that, but it's about finding peace with, I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And so here we find ourselves now. Your son, what year was it he graduated with his PhD?
2018.
Okay, so a little over 5 years ago, roughly 5 years ago at the time of recording. And
that's our picture.
There we go. For those who are listening, we're seeing a picture of his graduation at Oxford and his
Yeah.
cap and gown there. So,
Yeah.
and so since I'm curious what the conversations have been with Nicholas as an adult, and maybe particularly after achieving his PhD. Is there the opportunity to have more in-depth conversations about past experiences and learning, and for him to be able to kind of look back and say, and I know you mentioned like there was unresolved trauma there that kind of
Yes.
came out after a conversation, but what sort of conversations did you have with him after he got his PhD?
The second part of that story was I knew I couldn't help him with the trauma, but I said, tell us about the learning you and I did in 1995. And his face went from crying to absolute laughter. And he said, I'll never forget the poems you wrote for me. And he named the poems, 25 years, he named the poem. And then he said, learning about mapping and the mapping of the world taught me to love learning, and I never want to stop learning.
Mm.
And then
Wow.
finally he said to me, you wrote a poem about a witch's spell. I said, I did, Nicholas. And he's laughing. That's Alexa. What was I saying? And Nicholas started laughing about this poem. About the witch's spell, and he said, we wrote the ingredients for the witch's spell.
Right.
And I said, we did, Nicholas. And what's funny, that poem didn't make it into my book. That story didn't make it into because I deemed my poem too poor.
Right.
What I ignored was the implications, the emotional implications for learning for the child.
Mm.
I'm thinking I'm teaching the child about SP world, spin, spill, spot, spell. I'm not. He's learning that learning is so exciting and this is so much fun,
Right.
so much fun. And the learning of the SP words just happens in conjunction with that. But
Right.
the ultimate, what did he take away? That learning is so exciting and this is so funny and it's the funniest poem in the whole wide world. And we as teachers and parents forget the power of emotion in learning. And so all the time that Nicholas is learning, so am I. And in
Right.
fact, I am learning more than him. He's learning to get through life. I'm learning to teach other children to read.
Mhm.
And I am blown away by the things that I did right by mistake in that year of 1995.
I love the things that we do right by mistake. I'm a former nanotechnology researcher, so I was involved in chemistry and physics and quantum mechanics and high-level mathematics and whatnot. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but because I had ADHD, though, I got bored very easily, and I just jumped out of my PhD program and joined the Navy, as you do, and became a marine engineer instead for a period of time until I left the Navy and traveled the world and so on. But what you've said there is discovering or rediscovering the joy in learning. It doesn't have to be a chore if we can unlock what somebody is passionate about. Now, I guess I'm curious, has Nicholas ever spoken publicly about his educational journey?
That's a tough question.
Fair enough.
He's done some on YouTube with me, but
Mhm,
he
mhm.
actually finds it, as you can imagine, very difficult to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
Incredibly difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
And he's under a therapist now,
Mhm.
and that has helped him. And one day he might, but he just finds it, I think, so emotionally
Mhm, mhm.
challenging.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you are the storyteller for him, and you, of course, have a firsthand perspective, being the one who played such a significant role in his learning and education, and fostering this love for learning, and you yourself, your own personal growth and transformation. We think about between the before and after. This isn't just a story of Nicola's transformation; it's your transformation as well, where you go from a struggling, frustrated mother to one who has not only helped Nicholas, but you're helping others as well through your acquired skill set, your life experience, your struggles mean that you can now help others so they don't struggle in the way that Nicholas did. And so you're opening new learning opportunities for remarkable minds. And I think that in itself is just amazing.
Thank you. Because what we didn't mention was while I'm teaching Nicholas, I realized that I struggled in school and I am dyslexic. So for me as a dyslexic person to write a book was also huge.
Right.
Huge component. But,
Yeah. Well, as it's really a delight to share your story. You bring such joy and enthusiasm in sharing, such passion behind the story, and I think that's what really draws people in and engages them. I would love one day, if I ever have the opportunity, to invite Nicholas onto the show. If he ever gets to the place where he feels like he could talk about it, it would be a wonderful privilege for me to share with him a conversation about his story, his learning arc, because and I just think so many lives could be touched by hearing. It's such a powerful story. I love that you get to share it, and I would love to hear it from his perspective too. So here's me hoping and wishing that he gets to the place where he is able to share his amazing, incredible, inspiring story with others, to help others continue to learn. And so as we close out the episode today, first of all, let's just let people know if they want to connect with you, if say, you know what, this Lois lady, she is just remarkable. I would like to somehow see if I could have a conversation with her about what it is that she does, or maybe she can help my kid or something like that. Where do people find you?
the easiest place to find me is on my website at loisletchford.com. Otherwise, LinkedIn. Now I'm starting to reduce where I am. LinkedIn. I have been on Facebook, but recently everything's dropped a bit. Twitter, Instagram. Yeah. Instagram's the best one.
Keep it simple. I love that. And so it's maybe hard to distill it down to this, but I always like to ask my guests, if someone has listened to this conversation today and they could just take one nugget away from this conversation, what is it that you would like to share with people?
Believe in your child. Believe they are capable of being future rocket scientists.
I love that. Thank you so much, Lois, for being on today. It has truly been a pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.